pleasure it is to see you. It's been a while. I've been dead for 100 years, but it's nice to be back, I have to say. Now, this is me about the age I'm currently incarnated as, sort of mid-40s, height of my intellectual powers. Beard's a bit darker, I noticed there, but you know what 100 years will do to you. And again, this is obviously I was in life a spiritualist, and I am now a spirit. So this is entirely consistent. The whole business of marking the anniversary of a death seems a little morbid to me and unnecessary because of the continuity of spirits. But seeing as you people insist on doing these things, that's what brings us together. I died almost exactly 100 years ago, the 7th of November 1913, and it is, I have to say, a pleasure to see so many of you interested in finding out what it was like before I died, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. This, as I say, is my story. If you want more detail, and I can never resist a book plug, I published in 1905 an autobiography, My Life, a record of opinions and events. It's actually a wonderful book. So it is available, one of those nasty cheap reprints, you know. So do buy. I don't get a royalty, but I'm not doing this for any particular commercial purpose. Now, I'm assuming the reason you're here is you've heard of me. You probably, most people, and certainly biologists, and I have a friend I communicate through the spiritualist media, who's a biologist today, Andrew Berry. Nice chap. So Berry's a case in point. He knew who I was. He had this notion of there was somebody called Alfred Russel Wallace. But when I approached him during one of his séances, he said, I thought you were just a footnote. And that is indeed what I have been for a very long period of time. Everyone knows that the theory of evolution by natural selection was discovered by Charles Robert Darwin. Google evolution, what you see. I have to say, he's a good friend of mine, so I'm not going to be rude, but it's a slightly lugubrious photograph, that one, the big, bearded, cane brow, sort of miserable Darwin photograph. Theory of evolution was discovered by Charles Robert Darwin. Then, if you've got a conscientious textbook writer, there's a footnote, also by Alfred Russel Wallace, usually in about a 9-point font. That's me. And this is what I did. I was the co-discoverer of evolution by natural selection. This is a little bit of braggadocio. I don't want to. I mean, as you'll discover, I'm a little awkward about heaping praise upon my own head. This is an assessment of a colleague. I spent 4 years in the Amazon. I spent 8 years in Southeast Asia. I saw a lot of tropical biology over the years. And I do think that I was unusual amongst my Victorian colleagues in having the New World, Old World comparison. And not just having been to both, having really intimate knowledge of both environments. I'm also the founder of, and this should really have the term evolutionary biogeography. I mean, so I am the parent of an entire field of biological endeavour, trying to understand in the light of both geological and evolutionary history the distribution of organisms, why these particular organisms are here and those particular organisms are there. But I know you're here because you have a deep interest in my life. So I'm going to tell you the story. As I say, if you bought the book, you wouldn't be here. I'm just giving you a synopsis which is written in 2 very long and rather prolix volumes published in 1905. I was born in Wales, South Wales. This is the cottage. That's Mum and Dad. There's a sort of standard telling of the story that makes the following claim. The reason I've been so eclipsed by my good friend Charles Darwin, why I've been so relegated in the eyes of history, is because I came from the wrong side of the tracks, that I was working class, that he was this privileged member of the elite, and that it was a class issue. No! Bloody hell! But that's interesting. You see, you go to a séance, my friends, that's the sort of thing that happens. But usually it's not a man in a plaid shirt at the back to make it. I wasn't born on the wrong side of the tracks. My parents were actually rather socially well connected. My father was a lawyer. He never practiced law because he had his own income. Having said that, he had investing acumen of a cockroach. He lost money hand over fist. So even though we were definitely of the right class, and pretty comparable to Mr. Darwin's class, we were permanently in a state of impoverishment, which took us to South Wales. So this was really a place, it was simply a place where we could afford to live. It was the cheapest possible place. This is not Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay? And it's always slightly unfortunate. My dear friend and colleague, the young Mr. Berry, had to go to Wales last week. The Welsh are very excited about the fact that their son is having his centennial. It's a little difficult to break it to them. I only spent 5 years there, my first 5 years, and as I say, we weren't there because of a deep adherence or appreciation of Wales and the Welsh, as I say, simply because it was a bargain. But this is what my natal house looks like these days. Rather smart, actually, quite smart. This photograph was taken by young Mr. Berry earlier this summer. This is what I put in my autobiography. It's not a very good photograph, I apologise, but it is. You do get a sense of the proximity to the river. It's a beautiful part of South Wales. That's the River Usk flowing through the middle of town. And here is, takes you back, doesn't it? This is the church I was baptised in, way back when. This, by the way, was 1823, so 8th of January. So I'm actually 14 years younger than my friend, Mr. Darwin. So we're sort of a generation apart. One of the great puzzles about myself, which has puzzled generations, is the missing L. Russell only has one L. And in fact, it's still spelt, if you Google it, 4 times out of 10, people will park an extra L on it anyway, regardless. But this is interesting, in that here is me, you see, double L. So legally, I'm double L. At some stage, somebody decided, and I suspect I was not responsible, to remove the final L and thereby confound Googlers. We moved from Wales when I was about 5, back to where my mother's family came from, which is Hertford, just north of London. And this is where I had what vestige of a formal education I had at Hertford Grammar School. So very generic, early Victorian education, mainly classics, and circumscribed. My father's financial adventures took an even worse turn when I turned about 13, and there was simply no money for me to go to school. So, as I say, there is a contrast here, but it's not a class contrast, and these things matter in Britain, as you probably know. It's not a class difference between me and Mr. Darwin. What is clear, though, there's a severe difference in finances. Mr. Darwin, of course, went to elite Shrewsbury School, went to elite Edinburgh University to study medicine, which he didn't finish, and then to even more elite Cambridge University to study and become a member of the Church of England. I left school at the age of 13, needed to make a living. What I did was I joined my brother William as a surveyor. This was the era in which the railways were being put in. There was money in surveying and mapping out the potential routes for railways. And I have to say, I rather enjoyed it. It was a rather simple life, very peripatetic. We're moving, walking through the fields from village to village, mapping as we go. We're staying in village inns. We're spending a lot of time with rustics, you might call them. What I like best about it were 2 things. One, it gave me a chance actually to sort of complete elements of my education, because it's all trigonometry, right? So I actually taught myself a fair bit of mathematics in the process of doing this. The second thing is I'm out of doors, I'm walking around the natural world. And the thing I became most interested in were England's plants, which, you know, they're not. I've been to the tropics now. English plants aren't that exciting. But I really didn't know what was what. Here am I, you know, this is the sort of environment that I'm tramping through. I'm looking at dog roses and primroses and bluebells and harebells. And remember, is before the days of a handbook, where you just say, you know, the plants of Britain and Europe or whatever it is. So what I did, and this pains me, the recollection of it pains me. I wanted a book that told me about these wonderful things that I was looking at. So I saved and bought a book, Linley's Principles of Botany. Now that surely sounds like a broad, all-encompassing title. It's surely going to tell me what I want to know. It told me nothing I wanted to know. Turned out to be a text, and this I think does suggest I was a little naive at this stage, a little uninformed. It told me about the structure of plants, about xylem and phloem and different cell types and so on. It didn't tell me about dog roses and primroses and harebells and bluebells. Fortunately, the bookseller, and I do rely on the kindness of strangers, ladies and gentlemen, the bookseller allowed me to copy from a book that had that kind of information into the margins of the book. I just bought at vast and useless expense the information that I wanted. So that's me. This is the photograph of me about the age of 18. And look, Mama! Looks slightly severe, doesn't she? So this is Mum and me at about this stage, and that's my sister, Fanny. And I suspect that everything would have just progressed slowly. I would probably become a full-time surveyor and maybe become rather serious in my pursuit of botany, had not, in 1844, I met somebody who came from a somewhat similar to me background, a man called Henry Walter Bates. I met him in the library in 1844. Now, he was like me. He was largely self-educated, interested in natural history. But the difference was he was much more sophisticated than I was in his interest in natural history. And he, forget the boring little plants, he was interested in these guys. Actually, he wasn't interested in these guys because he was in Britain and none of these exotic, sexy, groovy species occur in Britain. Sorry, I know groovy isn't the Victorian word, is it? As a spirit, occasionally language suffuses upwards. Bates, what a great guy. Bates. I love Bates. I was 21. He was 19. The thing about Bates, and this is what really impressed me, was he already published a scientific paper. The year before he published, it's not the most sort of earnest of scientific papers, we'll see it in a minute, but he was somebody who'd taken that step from being just a naturalist, walking around and saying, oh, isn't that nice? Oh, that's not that, that's this. He'd taken the next step to actually contributing to the scientific literature. That's what I wanted to do. And Mr. Bates introduced me to beetles. And I have to say, they blew my mind. Okay? I had no idea. Okay? Now, and this, in retrospect, is really important. Because ultimately, what I would become remembered for, what I became most excited about, was understanding the roots, the origin, the processes underpinning biological diversification. Now, if I'm in Britain, has anyone been to Britain? It's a lovely place. The people are lovely. There are many, many great features of that country. But what a crappy natural environment. You've got a horizontal gale blowing across the place most of the time. Incredibly depauperate. You've got virtually nothing there. So just to give you an idea, there's 65 species of butterfly. That's pathetic. Okay? There are places I've been since where I can stand still and 65 species of butterfly will alight upon me. This is uber undiverse. But beetles are actually not at all bad, even in miserable Britain. There are probably about 4,000 species of beetle in Britain. And look, this was a great statement, which you might have seen before, made by a sort of latter-day colleague of mine, a man called Haldane, a British biologist, 20th century biologist, who was asked by the Church of England vicar, what Mr. Haldane has a lifetime of studying the works of the Almighty taught you about the Almighty? Ah, says Haldane, he must have an inordinate fondness for beetles. Okay? And that's a reference to this basic statistic. We've described about 1.7 million species on the planet hitherto. 350,000 of those are beetles, and that's a massive, massive underestimate. Any one of you, if you wanted to go and find a new species, is go climb a tree somewhere in the New World tropics, find a beetle up there, come down again, you've probably got a species new to science. I mean, it's not that difficult, okay? So this is an underestimate. This number is going to get much, 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 much bigger as we explore tree canopies, tropical tree canopies more thoroughly. But look, compare that. Birds are sort of emblematic of biological diversity, aren't they? You see blue ones, pink ones, green ones. I mean, people love birds. The ones with big, silly headdresses and long tails. Oh, birds, diversity, diversity. No. It's pathetic. It's 10,000 species globally. Beetles are where it's at. And so not only, if I'm interested in studying biological diversity, I need a diverse group.
The other thing, and this is more sort of technical and interesting, and it stems from the observation I've already told you that Bates, age 18, published a scientific paper. Okay? Now, imagine he was a butterfly guy in Britain. Butterflies were done, finished, full. There was nothing to do with butterflies in Britain. Beetles, because it's so diverse, there's always niches, so to speak, for scientific advance. This is very important for people like Bates and me, who are nobodies, right? Because there's always space for nobody in this very large zone. So, and I love Mr. Bates. This is the paper I've just referred to. Notes on Coleopterus, those are beetle-like insects frequenting damp places. This, by the way, I've read some of your recent scientific literature, dipping in from the spiritual world. I'll pick up a copy of Nature or Cell or whatever. Boy, can you guys not write. Turgid stuff you pump out. This is the kind of scientific prose I like to see. Many a long day in sunshine and in shower has seen me wading in those miry paradises in the praiseworthy endeavour to effect my little towards the advancement of our favourite science. I want to do that too. If Bates can do it, I can do it. So I'm going to become a beetle guy, and I'm going to become more than just a surveyor with an interest in natural history. I'm going to contribute scientifically. Now, it took me a while, and I'm going to show you my first scientific publication in its entirety. Don't worry, it's not. I don't have to go down to a 9-point font or anything. It's a short paper. And it's not the most distinguished of contributions, I'm willing to admit, certainly in retrospect. But it was so important to me at the time. It was the first step along the road from nobody naturalist to somebody scientist. Here it is. Published in the Zoologist. This is a account of a capture of this insect, Trichius fasciatus, near Neath in Wales. I took a single specimen, yada, yada, yada. Well, that's the paper. This rather, I thought, unnecessary note from the editor. The other insects in my correspondence list are scarcely worth publishing. Wanker. And as you probably know, it wasn't only me and Bates who were interested in beetles. This is my friend Charles Robert. And you might have seen this wonderful drawing done by a friend of his when he was at Cambridge, because he too was a rabid beetle hunter. Here he is. This is Charlie. Go it, Charlie, it says, with his net, his rather high top out, I have to say, and he's riding a beetle, as one does. And I've written articles. Near my death, I was asked, why, there are lots of smart people thinking about these ideas at the same time. Think of T.H. Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. There was someone who was sharp. Okay, you sit down and have dinner with him, and it's zing, 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 parry, riposte, zap. Right? Me and Darwin, we're kind of pedestrian. Could you pass the mashed potatoes? I mean, it's just, why didn't Huxley get there? And my claim was, and I stand by it, is because we studied beetles. It was that beetle thing. And it was an obsessive beetle thing. You've got to understand that. We knew everything about beetles. And there's this lovely story that Darwin wrote about later in life. He forgot about beetles, didn't do beetles after the Voyage of the Beagle, he was doing other things. But 20 years later, scurrying across the path was a beetle. And he knew instantly that one, it was interesting and unusual, and two, that it was similar to something he'd seen before but not the same. What he's just done is he's dusted off a 20-year-old massive, complex, three-dimensional database on board here, screened through it with that vision in mind against every beetle he's ever seen before, and he's accurately diagnosed it. It's stunning. It's an extraordinary achievement. And, I claim, in retrospect, the foundation of what we did. Because without that database, that enormous three-dimensional knowledge of the natural world and diversity, that almost intuitive understanding of every specimen we've seen, we wouldn't have got that. That was the underpinnings of what we did. So that's the empirical side of things. The other thing which was important in the development for Bates and me was a book we read. It was published in 1844, entitled, great title, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. It was published anonymously because it was blasphemous. It was blasphemous because it suggested that species were not fixed. And we all knew species were fixed because God says in the beginning of Genesis he made species. Bang, 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 bang. He didn't say anything like, let them evolve. Okay? This was a theory of evolution. And it wasn't, by the way, just biological evolution. It was the evolution of technology, the evolution of the solar system, the evolution of the cosmos. It was written, as I say, published anonymously, but we now know posthumously. Only posthumously was it revealed to be Robert Chambers, the encyclopedist. This was not a good book scientifically. Don't get me wrong. It was not, and it was trashed by scientific reviewers and so on. What it did, though, was brought an idea which was scabrous, which was scurrilous, which was in the gutter. This is the idea of evolution. It's evil. It's heretical. It's anti-establishment. It brought it out of the gutter and into the drawing room. It became something you could discuss, because this book, bizarrely, and I've tried reading it, well, I did read it, didn't I? Sorry. Mr. Berry told me he tried to read it and found it utterly unpalatable. But Abe Lincoln read it. I mean, that's serious penetration for a book of science. Queen Victoria, she didn't read it. She had it read out loud to her before going to bed by her German husband. Now, what an excruciating experience that must have been. The vestiges of the natural history of creation delivered in a German accent. Now, I thought this was a really interesting book, actually. I wrote to Bates about this. I said, Bates, the old boy, said, this is an ingenious hypothesis strongly supported by some striking facts and analogies. This is interesting. Look, you think about it. The notion of fixity of species is ridiculous. Why do you see clusters of similar species in particular places, for example? But if we're going to really try and get to grips with this idea, which I think is really important and interesting, we can't just sit here with our miserable, blighted, windswept beetles in Britain. We've got to go somewhere. We've got to go somewhere. And by somewhere, I think I mean the tropics, Bates, the old boy, because that's where stuff is. That's the seat of biological diversity, the citadel of biological diversity. So, look, this book, and by the way, Bates, the old boy, have you read Humboldt, the great German traveller? Have you read Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle. That's scientific travel. That's adventure, discovery, and a rattling good yarn. Okay? So the combination of Mr. Chambers' anonymous ideas and the possibility of understanding what was known as the species question, what we would call evolution today, alongside these inspirational travel narratives by giants like Humboldt and Darwin, convinced us that we should go somewhere. Now, this was slightly crazy, especially in retrospect. We didn't know anything. We didn't know anyone. We didn't have any money. We were just going to go somewhere and do science. Well, actually, we couldn't. We would have to do science and somehow bankroll this undertaking. We were going to bankroll this undertaking by selling specimens. Okay. Now, we were going to collect for ourselves because we're big scientists. Okay. But we're going to make money by selling sexy specimens to museums, obviously. But also, this is the era. This is pre-Downton Abbey. Okay. Now, after dinner, what shall we do? Let's sit down and watch another tedious episode of that boring soap opera. Okay. In those days, people didn't have that opportunity. What would you do after dinner? Obviously, you carve the women off. Off you go, ladies. Go do whatever you're going to do. We're going to my smoking room to have a cigar or two and marvel at my cabinet of curiosities. So there was a big market for natural history specimens. And, you would impress me. This is my bird of paradise. as opposed to some scummy little brown job. Right? So there's a real commercial opportunity. We took on an agent called Mr. Stevens, Samuel Stevens in London, who took 20%. That was the deal. We would send stuff to him, he'd sell it, he'd keep 20%, and that would bankroll the undertaking. So where were we going to go? Difficult. I mean, we barely knew what was out there. Okay? But we read a book, published in 1847 by an American. I don't know if you people know what Americans are like. They do exaggerate. This one was called Mr. Edwards, and he wrote this account of the rainforests of the Amazon. And this is what convinced us to go. And I challenge any of you to resist the allure of the Amazon if you read this. Monkeys are frolicking through festooned bowers or chasing in revelry over the wooden arches. Squirrels scamper in ecstasy from limb to limb, unable to contain themselves for joyousness. Well, look, Bates and I, the notion of ecstatic exploding squirrels was too much. But I do, in retrospect, does make me think that we were perhaps a little naive to be swayed by this kind of language. So, off we go. And this was an extraordinarily bold undertaking. We knew nothing. We were going into the wild.
1848. Take the mischief. There's a mischief. I figured you people were Latter-day, right? I mean, you take aircraft. This is what ships look like. I was trying to help you people. Took the mischief to Berlin, whereupon the great adventure started. And I started sending back missives, and partly as a reaction to the overwrought and inaccurate description of Mr. Edwards. And this is one of my first reactions. There is a weird gloom and a solemn silence in the rainforest, which combine to produce a sense of the vast, the primeval, almost of the infinite. It is a world in which man seems an intruder, and where he feels overwhelmed by the contemplation of the ever-acting forces which, from the simple elements of the atmosphere, build up the great masses of vegetation which overshadows and almost seems to oppress the earth. We had extraordinary times. We spent the first year or so collecting together. We were looking for high-profile species like these guys. This is an umbrella bird which has these fantastic head plumes. Again, big money in terms of the natural history market in London. This is a cock of the rock. This, which you'll see in a moment, is a lecking species. Now these, by the way, I have specimens out on the public floor of the gallery in my display of both of these birds. After about a year, we split up. And I'm sorry for the resolution of this projector. This is the Atlantic. These are the Andes. This is a large chunk of North America. This is the Amazon. Bates took the southern part, that's Solnaz. This is bloody umbrella birds in the way. Sorry, this is Manaus at the intersection of the Rio Negro and the Solnaz. I went up the Rio Negro and right up into the headwaters. And these were remote places. There were tribal groups I encountered that had never seen white people before. Almost everything that I collect, I collected was by definition new, because no Europeans had been there before. We split up, and by the way, people have written, historians of science, let go, man! Just come talk to me, okay? There are all sorts of theories that we split up, Bates and Wallace split up because they were squabbling over a woman and yada, yada, yada. And then there's the other possibility, which is homosexual intrigue. I mean, I ask you, no! There's two of us collecting for money in the same place, collecting the same things. It makes a hell of a lot more sense to split up and two of us collect in two different places, and we're going to double our output, relatively speaking. That's all it was. I went up here, and it was tough, being alone. And I'm sort of a backpacker. I believe that's the term a lot of people use these days. Think of Charles Darwin, when he went on the voyage of the Beagle. Remember, he was the captain's guest on the voyage of the Beagle? When he landed, the local hacienda owner would send a coach of 4, and with a guide and bodyguards and, a box of fudge. Not us. I was in a dugout canoe. And this is hard going, by the way. Remember, I'm collecting. So I'm accumulating. And it's not like every 30 or 40 meters there's a FedEx sending point. Okay? This stuff is just building up. Dugout canoe, cataract, rapid. What do? We portage, right? Take all the stuff out. These are butterfly specimens, pinned delicately. They don't take well to portaging. Okay? I'm getting sick from time to time. Just come back to me. Not nice. And the trouble is, I'm working with the locals. The locals are great in general. But one thing they really do like is one mode of collecting that I'm very dependent upon, which is pickling things. Cachaça, right? Which is the local rum. Actually, and it's perfectly good for pickling these specimens. Great, actually. Trouble is, I've got a bout of malaria, I'm delirious for a couple of days, out of the picture, you might say. I come around and find all my specimens are being drunk off. Now, a little bit of bat-flavoured cachaça or whatever. Like these novelty vodkas, but this is taking a bit too far. Anyway, it's not good for collections. My little bro came out, little Bertie. He wasn't, things weren't working out for him back in Britain. I was making a go doing this, so he came out and joined me. He wasn't the greatest, he was a nice kid. But it decided, he wasn't going to become a great natural history collector, so after about a year, I said goodbye. And I headed up, and he headed down. And this still pains me, because he came out to help me. I heard from Bates, who was down here in their lab, that he was nursing Herbert, who had contracted yellow fever. Then what? The disease usually runs its course fairly quickly. Did he survive and get on that boat back to Britain? Did he die? Did he survive or did he die? Did he survive? Did he die? I never heard. Because I was by now, way up here. It was several months later that I heard he died. God. Tragic. The only one I saw. And I was carrying my gun this one night. This is Victorian collecting, folks. But it was full of birdshot. Mostly I'm shooting bird, right? And I know if you hit him with high velocity rifle, okay, no bird, not a very valuable specimen. So I'm using this very light shot. The idea is basically just bring the bird down with minimal damage. I did realise when I met this fellow that spraying his face full of birdshot was not the way to go. It would just basically piss him off. But some of the things I saw were absolutely fantastic and super memorable to me. And I'm afraid there's no sound here, but I think you'll get the general idea. This is the cock of the rock, which I went way up the Rio Negro to see, and I saw them. The term that modern animal behavior people use is lecking. These things were lecking. This is the female, very drab. They all accumulate in one spot and then compete for. They show off to the female. It's actually, I'd love to. What a fantastic thing this was to see. The great thing about them is the way they compete. Is competitive bouncing. It's truly extraordinary. Anyway, eventually, look, she's thinking, God, that's a great bounce. Extraordinary sight. And eventually, somebody gets the nod, and Julie fertilizes her egg. Yeah, there she goes. Anyway. Back down to Manaus. This is my sketch. And it's time to go home. It's 4 years. My health is broken, actually. But I've got all this fantastic stuff. The first thing that happened on my journey down to Manaus, I discovered that the stuff I'd been sending downriver in the hope that it would eventually get shipped out to London had got no further than here because it had been impounded by customs. I'd failed to grease the right palms previously. So that's fine. When I get down there, I'm going to grease the right palms. Now I've got everything. It's going to be this triumphant return. It's going to be fantastic. And what's more, it's not just all these extraordinary specimens I've got, but I'm bringing a load of live stuff down as well. So I've got a toucan, I've got a spider monkey, I've got about 30 living animals. Now, I'm bringing these down across the continent, all the way down from the upper waters of the Rio Negro, across the continent to Belém, from where I'm going to take a ship. So these are my passport to the scientific big time. This is a toucan. Now, imagine, this is Victorian London. Just imagine walking into a scientific salon in Victorian London with this baby on your arm. This is going to make me, okay? But they weren't just my passport to scientific. They're my pets. I'm keeping them for months at a time as we're coming down river. So it was a sense of great excitement that on the 12th of July, 1852, oh fateful day, I boarded the brig, the Helen. This, as you can see, is going the opposite direction. Then, 3 weeks into the journey, 6th of August, bad experience. And it still pains me to think about it. It started off rather bizarrely. I was the only passenger, this is a freighter. I was sharing the captain's cabin. And there was a knock on the door one morning. It's the captain. The captain said, Mr. Wallace, this ship's on fire. I think you should come see. Okay. This, remember, is a wooden ship that spent too much time in the tropics. Now, it turned out that some of this cargo had been misstowed, and under the movement of the ship, some friction had caused the thing to... We made a bit of a tactical error at this stage. So we thought, I wonder what's happening. Let's open the hold. So almost instantly, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. This thing was... So what do I do? What to do? I'm barely out of bed. Okay. So I ran down to the cabin. It was full of smoke already. I couldn't see anything. But there was a small case. It was about the size of this. What is this? This device. About this size of papers that I've been working on the voyage. So I grabbed that. So we had to get the boats, the ship's boats, so 2 of them. These are clinker-hulled lifeboats. Okay, so they've been lowered down the side. So I'm still weak, actually, I'm still not really recovered from the depredations of fever as I travelled down the river. So I scrambled down the side of the boat, sliding down the rope. I absolutely ripped my hands to shreds, rope burn, which got really painful, really fast. Clinker-hulled boat. It's been lying upside down on the deck of the ship in the tropical sunshine. It's dry as all hell. So it's all shrunk out, which means that what should have been a clinker hull was a sieve. So the first thing we had to do, and it wasn't too long, fortunately, because as the water got into the timbers, so they expanded and solved the problem, we had to bail with our hands. It was that desperate, and my hands were sore. Let me tell you, my hands were sore. So I had a light calico suit that I was wearing. That was it. And my tin of a few drawings, a few notes, and lousy hands. So what are we going to do? Well, it turned out there was one logical thing we could do, and we did it. Which is wait, because the hope was that the burning pyre would attract shipping in the area and would be rescued. Okay? So we spent the next 24 hours, not the best 24 hours of my life, circling the burning wreck. It looked a bit like this. Now, this was excruciating. So, remember those animals? So not only is all my collections going up, and occasionally it was sort of disconcerting. There would be an explosion. There's the roar of the fire. It looked like a liquid cauldron in there. But occasionally it would be... those are my precious specimens and pots of alcohol. Great fire accelerants. But the worst thing were my living animals, the pets that I brought down with me. Remember, I brought them right across the continent. These were my pets. One by one, they were sprung from their cages by the flames. Didn't know where to go, but they went out into the bowsprit, which was one part of the ship which was not on fire. Now, even a strong-flying bird, when confronted with an infinite ocean, is a no-go. I watched them as they turned and plunged back into the flames. Every single one, except one parrot, that fell off, that we managed to seize off the bowsprit, and which we ate. Did we attract rescue? No. So, 2 boats, we got a bit of water, very little shelter. We drift. We drift, and we drift, and we drift. For 10 days. I thought we were going to die. Obviously everyone thought we were going to die. But I am British, so even though I'm mourning the loss of 4 years, I'm mourning the loss of my professional future, the loss of those animals, the death of my brother becomes even more pointless. Despite all those things, I'm British, and our stiff upper lip never wobbles. So, and I was proud of this observation. 4 nights into that lonely voyage, I was able to write. During the night, I saw several meteors, and in fact could not have been in a better position for observing them than lying on my back in a small boat in the middle of the Atlantic. That is putting a positive spin on things. So, I eventually made it home. We were rescued. Here are some of the images from that small box that I rescued. This is a rainforest tree. There's a palm tree. There's a drawing of a fish from the Amazon. I do love to draw. These were all that remained from 4 years of adventure. I wrote a couple of books, and I made a solemn vow to myself. Never am I going back to sea. By the way, the boat that rescued us, eventually the Jordison, nearly sank itself in the Bay of Biscay. It was a kind of ill-fated journey. I'm not doing this again. In fact, I wrote to my friend Spruce, 50 times have I vowed, if I once reach England, never to trust myself more on the ocean. But look, I've got nothing. I'm done. I'm still a nobody. I'm not a contributor. I'm not a contender, as I believe you people say. So, sorry folks, 18 months later, looks suspiciously like the same boat. This time, I went to Southeast Asia. This was an extraordinary set of journeys, by my own account. This is me looking rather dashing, don't you think? That photograph was taken in 1862 in Singapore. So 1854 to 1862, I was in Southeast Asia. Starting essentially in Singapore, went north a little way up to Malacca, but then ultimately, and this was sort of my goal, was to get all the way up to New Guinea. Okay. And this time, I'm happy to say, nothing went too wildly, comprehensively wrong. I basically got what I wanted to get. All sorts of things did go wrong. It's an extraordinary set of adventures. And I do recommend you read this book that I wrote, which has been in print ever since. It's my best-selling book. It's a great book. A great read. And it's a great description of the adventures and the places I went to. 125,000 specimens. That's excluding the ones which were eaten by feral dogs, destroyed by damp, destroyed by maggots, eaten by ants. That's actually about 40 a day. Thousands of new species. Extraordinary journeys, including this recognition of this discontinuity between the flora and fauna of Asia and that of Australasia today. And this, by the way, this has nothing to do with, this is Huxley. Huxley called it Wallace's line. That's not my style at all. But let's start with just the collecting angle. So this is the same gig. I'm selling stuff, collecting things for scientific purposes, but also selling stuff. And the biggies, of course, are these guys, which I love. Birds of Paradise. Just phenomenal. And I just want to give you a sense, and again, this is slightly beating my own drum, but I did a lot of collecting. A little bit of kudos is legitimate. This is, and again, there's a specimen outside. Please go and see it. This is a bird of paradise that I discovered myself. Wallace's standard wing. It was named by my colleague Gray at the Natural History Museum, Semioptera Wallaceite.
It's a beautiful thing. And we do have a specimen outside, which it's nice to meet old friends, which I collected. So that's here, owned by Harvard University, which is a recent place in America, I understand. Just to give you a sense of how intense this collecting was, birds are difficult to add to in terms of biological diversity. If I told you to go and find out a new species of bird, you wouldn't stand a hope, as I've just said. Much easier if you were all just digging up nematodes in the ground out there or whatever. There are plenty, even beetles, as I said earlier. Birds are difficult. Yet, in the 8 years that Wallace was travelling, he discovered over 200 new species. That's stunning. There's 10,000 species of birds, so he discovered 2% of all bird species in that 8 years. That's stunning. And just to remind you, they're pretty damn amazing. This is some David Attenborough footage of birds of paradise doing their displays, which are just spectacular, if occasionally slightly idiotic. Now, I went a long way to see these things. I did eventually make it all the way to New Guinea. I was one of the first Europeans actually to spend serious time on the mainland of New Guinea. Fortunately, a lot of these birds are hunted for their feathers by the locals because their feathers are important in decoration and or human ornamentation. So locals would have information on where I could find these things. And I was able to see, for example, multiple males performing courtship dances, again, for females. This is obviously one of the sillier ones, carefully cleaning a little spot in order to display to a female. He's being slightly anal about it by the looks of things. Now it's time to go. Oh. Oh. What a fantastic animal. But the unfortunate thing about this display, and Mr. Attenborough told me this, was he was displaying to nobody. There was no female on. It was just really a practice run. So, we've all done it, boys. This one is bringing in a female, I think, yes. Ah, there she is. You can see in the background. Now he's going to give her the work. There she's getting a good bird's eye view, so to speak. Oh, this will get her. Yes. She's looking a bit timid, actually. Now she's retiring to consider. Oh dear. I think that's a thumbs down. A deflating experience. All accounts. Oh, anyway. So the birds of paradise were fantastic. The butterflies too. This is a species I named from Roger Brooke. My friend James Brooke, one of the White Raja, extraordinary buccaneer / adventurer who ended up owning a chunk of northern Borneo, the province of Sarawak. And he was a great friend of mine, host to me, and this extraordinary bird-winged butterfly. Again, we've got a specimen outside, so please go and see it. I named in his honour. And many of these bird-winged butterflies are just gorgeous. Again, there's a specimen of this. This is Ornithoptera primus. And this is what I wrote about it, because it's so exciting to do this. It's true, I'd seen similar insects in cabinets at home, but it is quite another thing to capture such oneself, to feel it struggling between one's fingers, and to gaze upon its fresh and living beauty, the bright gems shining out amid the silent gloom of a dark and tangled forest. There's the rainforest, all sorts of adventures. This is a picture from my Malay archipelago. Needless to say, that snake was rather closer than I intended it to be. Nicely, this snake has come back. It's kept at the Linnaean Society in London. I saw all sorts of extraordinary habitats, both underwater and terrestrial. And, you know, perhaps this was the most remarkable thing I saw the whole time. This guy. This is the Mayas, as they were known locally. You call them orang utan. And I killed a lot of them. I'm afraid that was what we did in those days.
but I was really one of the first Victorian scientists really chanced to get to see them and sort of familiarise myself with them live. There's my friend, young Attenborough, obviously having a chat with this animal which is doing its washing. Trying best not to be distracted. Stop talking. I shot a female, actually about this size, and she came down from the train. I shot several of these.
I got good money for these. I'm not sentimental about them. And also, remember, that was the best way. We were still in the stage of comparative anatomy. If we were going to study them, we needed specimens. I shot one, and she had an infant with her. So for 3 months, I raised, I'd say only 3 months, because I didn't, this was a sweet little animal. My friend for 3 months. But I didn't have high-fat milk to feed this little fellow. I had palm milk. I found another little monkey that was his plaything and companion. But eventually, I'm afraid, and I wrote a letter to my mother, and I described my baby, my new baby. And until the last line of the letter, when I mentioned the baby's covered with brown fur, my mother assumed that it was indeed an adopted native baby. And you can only be so sentimental. I sold the corpse to the British Museum for £4. The other thing that was extremely exciting in Southeast Asia was this. Who knows what that is?
Durian.
Durian, yes. Durian is an extraordinary fruit. And I just want to give you a sense of my excitement about the durian, because I start off describing it in a very scientific way. The 5 cells are soundly white within, and each filled with an oval mass of cream-coloured pulp, embedded in which are 2 or 3 seeds about the size of chest. God, this is boring. Get on with it, Wallace. This pulp is the eatable part, and its consistency and flavour are indescribable. A rich butter-like custard, highly flavoured with almonds, gives the best general idea of it, but intermingled with it come wafts of flavour that call to mind cream cheese, onion sauce, brown sherry, and other incongruities. There is a rich, glutinous smoothness in the pulp which nothing else possesses, but which adds to its delicacy. It is neither acid, nor sweet, nor juicy, yet one feels the want of none of these qualities, for it is perfect as it is. It produces no nausea or other bad effect, and the more you eat of it, the less you feel inclined to stop. In fact, to eat durians is a new sensation worth a voyage to the east to experience. That's, for me, what that journey was. It was, yes, a scientific journey, but it became so much more. It became a journey of passion and enthusiasm. Now, remember what I was doing all the time? I was collecting material for sale. And that made me acutely sensitive to what we'll call the geographic distribution of variation. If I am here on this island and I find this specimen here, and then travel to this island only 50 kilometers away and find this specimen, which is different, is it sufficiently different to be a different species? It's similar. So always ask, if it's 2 different species, I can sell it as a separate species. There's more money, right? I'm always short of money. Okay? So these things matter commercially. And it was this sort of geographical awareness that yielded an insight that I've already mentioned has become known as Wallace's line. Travelling between these 2 islands, Bali and Lombok, I noticed that you've got Asian-style birds there and Australian-style birds here. Turns out mammals as well, mammals and so on. Wallace's line, the boundary between 2 biogeographical provinces. And this is courtesy my modern friends. We now know we're essentially dealing with 2 huge shallow water plates, Sahul and Sunda. This is the area in the middle. These might be close now, but this is because of ancient tectonic processes. Wallace's line. The thing that I was most excited about was a paper I wrote in 1855, which was my first, if you like, big science paper. Previously, I'd been focused, my publications had been sort of detailed natural history, new species of that, range extension of that, and so on. Then in 1855, I was stuck here at the bottom of this mountain in the rainy season, nothing much to do but think and write. So I wrote this paper, known as the Sarawak Law, because I was in Sarawak, Borneo at the time. Every species has come into existence both in space and time with a pre-existing closely allied species. That's half of the theory of what we now call evolution. What Mr. Darwin called descent and modification. Namely the fact you've got a genealogical process, change from generation to generation to generation at the heart of the evolutionary process. Why do you find kangaroos clustered in Australia? Because there was an ancestral kangaroo and there's been subsequent diversification. Why, when you look in the fossil record, do you find a particular set of dinosaurs there? Where do you look for similar dinosaurs? Do you go much more ancient? Much more recent? No, you go to contiguous strata. Okay? Now, we're still missing part of this theory of evolution. What entrains that change, that genealogical change, to produce useful ends? That came next. I was in Ternate, and I was suffering from malaria, as one does. Here's the account that I wrote about it. Don't worry about the details. Basically, suddenly it came to me, it really was. I was thrashing, I was fevered, I was chilled, and suddenly, natural selection. I didn't call it natural selection, that's Mr. Darwin's term. I don't like that term, okay? But it's become known as natural selection. It's a simple idea that natural organisms produce too many offspring, so there must be competition for finite resources, and the ones which have better genetic endowments are going to win that competition, which means next generation will be enriched for those endowments. It's pretty damn simple. What was I going to do with this paper? It was a damn good idea. Well, the previous one had been really disappointing. I thought it was big, it was heretical, it was exciting. Nobody paid any attention to it. Mr. Stevens wrote, saying, could we stop theorizing? I can't sell theories. Well, thanks, Mr. Stevens, for your support. Mr. Darwin wrote, saying he was sympathetic to the lack of interest that people had shown. He said he was interested. So that's why I sent this paper, not to a journal, but to Mr. Darwin. He said he was interested. Okay. Boy, was he interested, I find, in retrospect. This is the mailman calling at Down House. This is Down House, where my friend Mr. Darwin lived. This is Mr. Darwin's chair. And here is a rather after-the-fact illustration of the spectator sport that was Darwin reading his mail. This is Joseph Hooker, the botanist, and Charles Lyell, the geologist. So Darwin received my letter on the 18th of June, 1858. All my originality, whatever it may amount to, will be smashed. Now, you're thinking, yeah, who cares? Well, remember, he'd been gestating this idea for 20 years. This was his baby. And you say, look, still, he's a happy, wealthy, successful man. Who cares? He's a scientist. Why do we do science? We don't do it because we get a lot of sexual access to members of the opposite sex. 2, we don't do it for the money. We do it because we get associated with the ideas. It's the ideas that excite us and the ideas that are ours. And for Darwin to lose that priority, bang, I feel bad for him. So, what happened were his two friends, Lyell, the geologist, Hooker, the botanist, his friends, my friends. They organised a very unusual thing. 2 weeks after that letter arrived, they organised at the Linnaean Society of London, the premier forum of the day, to have a joint presentation. They read my paper, and then Mr. Darwin cobbled together some of his previous writings. And so there were 2 announcements of the same theory in one paper. And they put his name first. Bastards. Alphabet. Historical precedents. I was the one that wrote the bloody paper. Anyway, let's not go there. And it was announced here, these are Mr. Berry's American students. Rather disrespectfully sullying the great, august Linnaean Society. Just a point which nobody seems to know about. These were bad times for both Charles Darwin and me. It was bad times for Charles Darwin because he was in danger of losing his precedence on his baby, his idea. But also, when I say he was in danger of losing his baby, he lost his baby, this baby. Charles Waring Darwin, their youngest, died at age 18 months on the 28th of June, right in the middle of that 2-week period between 18th of June and 1st of July. So Darwin wasn't at the Linnaean Society, he was burying his baby. Me? Of course, I didn't know what was happening, but I'd finally made it at this stage to New Guinea. I'd been trying to get to New Guinea all along. This is where I wanted to be, and it was a disaster. I got sick, and then on the 26th, again, in this same 2-week window, my boy, Juma, who I brought with me from Indonesia, died of dysentery. So, the theory was out. We were both a bit demoralised. And famously, as you probably know, The paper didn't have a huge impact, telling me. This is the presidential address summing up the year 1858 of the Linnean Society. The year has not indeed been marked by any of those striking discoveries which at once revolutionised, so to speak, the Department of Science on which they bear. Wrong! Second only to the guy who told the Beatles, the record company executive who turned down the Beatles on the basis that guitar bands were on the way out. You're thinking, this seems a bit of a weird arrangement. How did you feel about this, Mr. Wallace? Well, thank you for asking. I wrote to my mother, and I'm just thrilled. No, it couldn't have been better. For me, it couldn't have been better. I was a nobody. Struggling nobody, a collector. Now I'm co-published with the august Mr. Darwin. I made it. So, as I wrote to my mother, this assures me the acquaintance and assistance of these eminent men on my return home. I've made it. What about the origin of species? The origin of species mentions me by name 4 times. It's 502 pages. This is what Darwin produced to assert his precedence, his priority, as soon as that paper, the 1858 paper had come out. What was my reaction to that? Am I resentful? No. This is brilliant. I couldn't have done this. There's so much in this. It's so powerful. I have nothing but admiration for Mr. Darwin. This is what I wrote to Batesy. Mr. Darwin has given the world a new science, and his name should... Actually, sorry, it wasn't. It was to Mr. Sims, whom you don't know, but it doesn't matter. And his name should, in my opinion, stand above that of every philosopher of ancient or modern times. Funny, I didn't know about modern. The force of admiration can no further go. So I want you to understand that people don't get this. A large part of the reason that I'm a footnote is because I asked to be one. This was Mr. Darwin's idea. I was a Johnny-come-lately, a young man in a hurry. He had generated and created that idea. Don't feel bad for me. It was a privilege to be part of that process of discovery. And let me just demonstrate to you something which people apparently... there's lots of people running around today. Young Berry, for example, occasionally will get all worked up about the fact that poor old Wallace has been neglected. No, I chose to be. Let me show you how I did it. So, 1869, I published the Malay Archipelago. It's a 2-volume book. This is this account of those 8 years. The 8 years which yielded both the Sarawak Law and the Ternate Paper of 1858. Okay? And I dedicated it to Charles. Dedicate this book not only as a token of personal esteem and friendship, but also to express my deep admiration for his genius and his works. Now, in this book, it's a memoir, it's a personal account of my time there. It's about when I got sick, it's about this, it's about that, it's a very personal book. How much space do I dedicate to my discovery, the account of the Sarawak paper and the Ternate paper? How many pages? How many chapters? How many words? The answer in all cases is 0. I didn't mention it. Because I didn't want to mention it. This is something I did. I moved on. Mr. Darwin's idea. Now you might say, well, maybe you thought it was too sciencey to mention. No. I put plenty of science in this book. This is the most boring page of the book. This is an account showing how many moths I caught on different nights, according to the weather conditions. Okay, so this is not an attempt to dumb down stuff for popular consumption. And maybe I didn't want to talk about evolution. I talk about evolution in this book. Of course I talk about evolution. It's the best idea anyone's ever had. So, for example, I'm talking about mimicry, where things come to look like other things. And I've talked about how that evolved. The principle of variation and that of natural selection, or, well, I prefer the term survival of the fittest, as elaborated by Mr. Darwin in his celebrated Origin of Species. So I refer to it, but always attributed to Mr. Darwin. It's Mr. Darwin's. I came afterwards. And the final thing I have to say, it's sort of just a repeat point on this, is that my major book on evolution I entitled Darwinism. Before Darwinism came in, and I was in the 1860s, I was campaigning to use the term Darwinianism. It's a bit of a relief we didn't go there. And there were, I'm afraid, few. So in general, Darwin and I were completely on the same page. But in general, there were some differences. We had a big disagreement about human evolution, which was largely predicated on the fact that I'd spent too much time with what my friends and colleagues called savages. Native people. They were every bit as good as you or me. There was nothing superior about wandering around with a white skin and a pair of spectacles. But I use, and this is a big contrast between me and Charles Darwin. Darwin, after The Origin of Species, he just knuckled down, publish, consolidate, concretize, building on the foundation of The Origin of Species. What did I do? I wrote about everything that matters. And this is what I want to be remembered for. I don't want to be remembered as somebody who did some evolution stuff once. I want to be the guy who mattered, who made passionate arguments about causes that mattered. So here's my account. This is my suggestion that we conserve the natural environment. People so immersed in the pursuit of wealth as to be blind to higher considerations. They will charge us with having culpably allowed the destruction of some of the records of creation which we had it in our power to preserve. And while professing to regard every living thing as the direct handiwork and best evidence of the Creator, yet with a strange inconsistency seeing many of them perish irrecoverably from the face of the earth, uncared for and unknown. I am a socialist. To allow one child to be born a millionaire and another a pauper is a crime against humanity. And for those who believe in a deity, a crime against God. I have other radical opinions, which I won't bore you with, except one, which is really a little bit out there, but sometimes modern audiences find it amusing. I actually am reasonably enthusiastic about giving women the vote, which is a rather contentious issue. None of the arguments for or against have any weight with me, except the broad one, which may be thus stated: all the human inhabitants of any one country should have equal rights and liberties before the law. Women are human beings, therefore they should have votes as well as men. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say this afternoon. I see I've overrun. One of the awkward things is I have a fob watch, obviously, which I mislaid in my travels through time and space. And Mr. Perry has a regular watch, but he can't wear it because it ruins the costume. So apologies for going on too long. I suppose, look, nobody should feel constrained to stay here, but if anyone has questions, ask away. Before people start leaving, though, so do go check out the material we've got on display out near the entrance of the museum. There should be a fleet of reasonably informed undergraduates to tell you what you're looking at. Fingers crossed. And there is, we've got an event starting at 4 in the Geological Lecture Theatre, for which it was a ticketed event, free tickets. Even if you haven't got tickets, I mean, we are in principle sold out, but usually with free ticket events, that means people sign up for tickets months ahead of time and then either forget, disappear, or just blow it off. So, and I think we have a rubric in there saying that people have to claim their tickets 15 minutes beforehand, so hopefully there'll be plenty of space for those who are unticketed. That's going to be a panel event with a bunch of people talking about different aspects of Wallace the scientist, Jim Costa, Wallace the social activist, John Durant, and James Wood, the New Yorker literary critic, is going to talk about Wallace. He described Wallace to me as a proto-Orwellian pamphleteer, which I thought was rather nice. Then after that, E.O. Wilson will be joining us, and he'll be in conversation with young Berry. I'm talking about parallel, and I'm not sure how this is going to work, parallel moves in Ed's career and my career. We'll see how that comes out. And then after that, there is a reception up here on the public floor of the Harvard Museum of Natural Science. And there'll be a chance then to view the Wallace material we've got. But if anyone has any questions they'd like answered now by Mr. Wallace is at your beck and call, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir. I wouldn't have said sir if I recognised it.
And you're the young Berry, is that right?
No, Mr. Wallace.
Oh, yes. So what did Mr. Wallace do later on?
What did he do later on? You want the final 60 years of his life. After coming back in 1862, he was actually a wealthy man. He'd been very successful collecting. His agent had invested the revenue in Indian railway stock, and he was making about £300 a year. He went, to start with, he did a huge amount of science. He published 5 or 6 tremendously important and influential papers the first 5 or 6 years after getting back. He also became a spiritualist, which is a bit dodgy, starting in 1865. And this is what I meant, sorry, this is what I was saying at the end. I became a spiritualist, which is not dodgy in the least. But I also got engaged with all sorts of increasingly radical causes. I was a big opponent of smallpox vaccination, for example. I can tell you more about. I became a fan of phrenology, which people tell me was not the right horse to back. But I became very engaged with socialism. Interestingly, my book, The Malay Archipelago, published in 1869, had at the end what I would describe, I think with some pride, as a rant. I said, I've lived in a Dayak longhouse in northern Borneo. This is primitive, savage society. And these guys have got it right. They live in harmony with nature and with each other. It's egalitarian, there's no ownership of stuff, everyone helps everyone else. And then I come back to civilized Britain. What do I see? Poverty, misery, crime, inequity. So I said, it seems those guys seem to be doing something more right than us civilized people. Right? Well, my friend J.S. Mill, the philosopher/economist, read that, and he was interested in the reform of land practice. And to cut a long story short, that eventually, after Mill's death, resulted in my founding something called, or becoming the founding president of something called the Land Nationalization Society, which claimed that private ownership of land was the root of all societal evil. So I was very active, politically engaged. Also, financially, I actually had inherited my father's lack of acumen when it came to money. I made a number of investments, all of which were appalling. So fairly soon, and I basically lost all my money, fairly soon I was reduced, and this just still makes me weep at the memory and will probably cause many people in this room to weep simultaneously. I became a professional exam grader. And it was only actually through the kind offices of Mr. Darwin, who organised through a special petition to Gladstone's government, that in 1881 I got a £200 per annum British government pension, which really held things together. But the short answer, Mr. Fisher, is I had a long and interesting life. Yes, sir?
Lord Wallace, there's rumour that you came...
I'm not a lord, young man.
you should be.
I know, you're right.
There's rumour that you came here to this esteemed museum.
Oh, that's a very good
Is that
point.
true?
It is absolutely true. In 1886 to 1887, I visited the United States and Canada, which I guess still was a sort of colony in those days. It was a lecture tour. I was hoping to make some money. I was giving lectures on socialism, spiritualism, and evolution. In fact, it was those lectures, the evolution ones, that became my book, Darwinism. There were several. I went primarily to make money. The other reason I wanted to see my bro, John. My older brother, John, had gone to California in the gold rush. So I had gone to Brazil in 1848. He went to California in 1849. We had a reunion in 1887, which was really nice. I met Mr. John Muir, toured the Redwoods, went to Yosemite. I went to the White House. I believe it was Grover Cleveland. You might be able to... Anyway, I wrote you should read it in my autobiography. I wrote an account of that meeting. I said, I met the President of the United States. Neither of us were very interested in meeting the other, had very little to say to each other, and both were relieved when the meeting was over. And I came here to Mr. Agassiz Museum, here at Harvard University. Mr. Agassiz, as you know, was one, the founder of this museum, and two, a rabid anti-Darwinian. He hated evolution by natural selection. And he erected this museum as a monument against Darwinism. His thinking was this, and he revolutionized the display in museums, by the way, because he displayed things biogeographically, not taxonomically. Normally you put all the birds here, all the mammals here, all the ducks here, right? He said, let's put Australia here, Africa here, and so on. Okay? The thinking is this. He believes that God designed things for whoever they are. So Australia, from the divine perspective, is a finite biogeographic unit. So we should put all of Australia together. Right? Now, and I agree with him, but I agree with him for a different reason. Because if you go and look at Australia and you see the diversification, say, of kangaroos, which you see by seeing them in the Australian context,
That is absolutely beautiful, powerful evidence of an evolutionary genealogical process. So I wrote this essay about my visit to the Museum of Comparative Zoology, and I do absolutely feel it was the best museum I've ever seen. And I say that partly because it was the best explanatory exhibit of the theory of evolution by natural selection. And I'd say there's a double irony here. That one, in the land of Darwin, Britain, all we have are these tedious, I'm thinking of the Natural History Museum here, tedious taxonomic halls, spread out, nothing interesting, calculated only to inspire wonder by the number of specimens packed into the cases. That's one irony, and the second irony is this poor old Agassi. Of course, this museum is his way of undoing Darwin, and he's done exactly the opposite. Yes, sir?
What does the spirit of Alfred Russel Wallace think of the increasing emphasis of molecules over whole organisms and ecosystems in science today?
A very interesting question. As a spiritualist, I'm perfectly aware of the fact we're comprised of molecules. As a scientist, which inevitably means to some extent a reductionist, I'm perfectly happy with the fact we're getting extra power in our scientific analysis, and I have been trying to keep up with the literature in my disembodied way. I think it's remarkable and beautiful, and especially, obviously, and I'm sure you would appreciate this, the application of molecular thinking, if you like, to age-old problems that I and Darwin were grappling with cruder, blunter tools, like trying to reconstruct phylogenetic history, the evolutionary history of life. So I absolutely applaud that which is going forward molecularly. What concerns me is that there's too much focus at that level of analysis. And the kind of skills, remember what I told you about the reason Mr. Darwin and I got there was because we had this massive on-board familiarity with organisms, not with the 3', 5' polarity of DNA strands. Okay? And I do worry that the emphasis on molecules is depriving us of one of the fundamental underpinnings of natural science, namely natural history. What a pleasure it is to see you. It's been a while. I've been dead for 100 years, but it's nice to be back, I have to say. Now, this is me about the age I'm currently incarnated as, sort of mid-40s, height of my intellectual powers. Beard's a bit darker, I noticed there, but you know what 100 years will do to you. So, and again, obviously I was in life a spiritualist, and I am now a spirit, so this is entirely consistent. The whole business of marking the anniversary of a death seems a little morbid to me and unnecessary because of the continuity of spirits. But seeing as you people insist on doing these things, that's what brings us together. I died almost exactly 100 years ago, the 7th of November 1913, and it is, I have to say, a pleasure to see so many of you interested in finding out what it was like before I died, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. This, as I say, is my story. If you want more detail, and I can never resist a book plug, I published in 1905 an autobiography, My Life, a record of opinions and events. It's actually a wonderful book. So it is available, one of those nasty cheap reprints, you know. So do buy. I don't get a royalty, but I'm not doing this for any particular commercial purpose. Now, I'm assuming the reason you're here is you've heard of me. You probably, most people, and certainly biologists, and I had a friend I communicate through the spiritualist media, who's a biologist today, Andrew Berry, nice chap. So Berry's a case in point. He knew who I was. He had this notion of there was something called Alfred Russel Wallace. But when I approached him during one of his seances, he said, I thought you were just